Hi there, everyone. It is just after 1 o'clock. Welcome on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. Go ahead and jump on our chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from, what region you're in. Laura Dutch and Ellen Wheeler, our first two guests over on the chat. Edgar, how are you? Another busy day here in California, that's for sure.
Another busy day, busy week for our folks. I mean, I think it's appropriate to just acknowledge our folks, our families. I think are collectively dealing with a lot, right? The combination of the pandemic, which we all have been, becoming experts on, but then add this whole school reopening, which I think we all need to be fortunate that our members are doing that work, but that doesn't come without its own peril, as we're going to discuss, and some of the challenges. And then I think it's worth noting just parts of the state, especially up here in our neck of the woods in Northern California, still dealing with wildfires and the ramifications to schools and air quality. So safe to say there's a lot going on out there, just, keeping our folks and their families in our thoughts there as they're dealing with so much right now.
Yeah, they are absolutely dealing with so much right now. Sheldon Smith, Angela Shull, our loyal viewer, Michelle, Deanna, and Don, it's so good to have you guys on the show. We've got a very packed show for you today. We're going to cover a couple of news topics. And then Dr. Smita Malhotra from Los Angeles Unified School District, their medical director there, is going to join us to talk a little bit about the campaign to get students and educators vaccinated. I do want to point out a couple of things. First off, Edgar, you can see over my left shoulder that I have my San Diego State and Penn State flags up there. That is because both of those schools, and to a lesser extent USC, have their first games in a week and a half. I can't tell you how excited I am that college football is back. And one thing that you and I did not get to enjoy last year that we will get to enjoy this year is the heckling that goes on in the hallways with all of the smack talk, if you will, about the college football teams and everybody's alma mater. I'm certainly looking forward to that this year.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just heard a little bit of, take our folks behind the scenes, executive producer Michael Kelly and Naj were getting into it about, who has the best football conference in the U.S. Well, that'll be a topic for another day, but yes.
I noticed that
football season kind of snuck up on us here, but it's that time of year.
I noticed, Edgar, that you weren't jumping in touting the Pac-12 as the top conference.
I gotta pick my battles here now. There's only so much we could take on here. I'll save that one for another.
And Deanna is also fired up about college football season. Good. Hey, Edgar, but a couple of topics. I want to ask you about this. There was a webinar earlier today with Tony Thurman, Dr. Naomi Bardak, the state lead on Safe Schools for All, and Linda Darling-Hammond on safely reopening and operating schools in California as there is the return to the classroom. Any updated information, news that you can bring to us from that?
Yeah, I think it was one. I think we have to appreciate the effort from the state leaders. I think this was organized by Superintendent Tony Thurman, a good old friend of the show, he's hearing that there's a lot of questions, a lot of angst about independent study, about the health guidance. And so he tried to bring in some of the leaders, Dr. Bardak from the Safe Schools for All team, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond representing the administration, Ben Cheetah from the governor's office. And I think it's worth checking out. It's 60 minutes long. I think the first part of the webinar was really them laying out the science again, kind of what they've learned about transmission, things that our folks probably have heard in some way, shape, or form, but what's guiding their decision-making. And then on the tail end, there was some Q&A, some limited Q&A, that was scripted in terms of and questions that keep coming up from our members. I will say, just to so there's no suspense, because I think it's the number one question we've gotten over the last couple months. Mm-hmm. They did not, unfortunately, give any new updates on sports guidance. They didn't address that. We did ask them to ask that question. They didn't. We'll get into this issue a little bit. We asked them to kind of give some clarity on outdoor exposure. Dr. Bardak touched on it briefly. I don't know that it's going to answer a ton of questions for folks. They did. I think one topic that we'll definitely get into with our guest is on quarantines and kind of what we're seeing, some of the challenges and differences around the state. So all told, I mean, there was some information put out there. I think it's safe to say there's going to be some continued questions even after today.
Yeah, and you brought this up, and I think there's got to be that moment of frustration. We've kind of seen it building, and this is the youth sports, the choir, the band guidelines, because now we've gone through week 0 of the high school football season. Week 1 is here, and we still don't have anything. And it seems like school districts are just, hey, we're just moving through as scheduled, and if something comes down, then we'll see what we need to do to make changes. But Edgar, I have to assume, just from the calls you and I are on, and then your general discussions, there's some frustration out there.
Yeah, it's really meant that folks have had to take matters into their own hands. And I think in some cases that's good. In some cases, maybe not so good. As we'll hear from Dr. Malhotra, the LA Unified and a number of other districts have had to just move ahead and say, okay, we're going to come up with our own rules. In the absence of having any clear guidance from the state on some of these issues. So I think it's just, and we've seen that now the challenge is, especially when we talk about youth athletics or even quarantines, that you can have neighboring districts abiding by very different rules, which I think causes other challenges within the system.
Before we bring on our guest, I do want to make note of something that we've put on the ACSA Resource Hub. We've had inquiries about how districts are communicating positive COVID cases in classrooms, in their schools, how they're talking about just exposure. We have added some district resources onto our ACSA Resource Hub. They're examples of what some districts are using. Content.acsa.org, or you can go to the homepage, acsa.org, and access the Resource Hub. Those resources are right there on the homepage of the ACSA Resource Hub. Examples, best practices, some of what your fellow districts are doing. Go ahead and take a look at some of those, because what I'm hearing is everybody's kind of doing something different, and this might give you a better lens of how to move forward as we make our way through September, October, November. So again, that's available, content.acsa.org. Edgar, as we bring in our guest, I want to just read a couple of things about LA Unified, because I think they're important to set up our guest. Earlier this month, LA Unified offered tours so parents could see the mitigation steps by the district. And I do have a list of some of those. Just give me a second here, folks, because this is some of what they've done. Upgraded air filtration systems, increased custodial staff, a robust testing program, requiring masking of all students and staff that enter the campus. So those are just a couple of things. And then just yesterday, the district announced that as early as today, appointments could be scheduled for eligible students and employees to participate in school-based vaccination clinics. Mobile vaccination teams will visit every middle and high school in the district to deliver the first and second doses beginning August 30th. So there's a lot going on in LA Unified, a lot that we can talk to with our guest. Dr. Smita Malhotra is the medical director at LA Unified, and she joins us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Doctor, it's so good to have you on the show. Give us a lay of the land of how things are going in LA Unified. We've seen the headlines about positive test cases. We just read off some of the things that the district has been doing. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What does it look like in LA Unified?
So I want to set up, and give you some perspective as to what our school district has done, really. We have come back to full in-person learning. We are the second largest school district. We've come back to full in-person learning after 17 months. That too in the middle of a pandemic with mitigation measures in place. And so this first week, I've been incredibly amazed by what our staff and our communities have done to bring everyone back together to full in-person learning. And so with that being said, you had said all of our mitigation measures in place, our robust testing system, our required masking, our upgraded air filtration systems. We had these mitigation measures in place when we opened in spring in the hybrid fashion. And so when we came back to fall, we were having all our processes, but just at a larger volume. And so we've learned to have all of this going on at a much larger volume. And yes, we did expect positive cases, but we also had a process to take care of our positive cases. So in the last week or so, we've had about 2,000 positive cases, but we are also doing 95,000 tests per day. So the positive cases are small but important, and we've learned to accommodate and take care of those students and families.
Doctor, just first of all, just kudos to what your team and and all of our friends there at LA Unified have been able to accomplish. Just when we talk about scale and the challenges. And not to mention that you have a few eyeballs on you, right? So anything that happens in LA, chances are it's going to get known and seen. So just I think it's great to start on this whole area of positives of what we've been able to accomplish as a system. I'm going to ask you a little bit about quarantines. I referenced it in the opening. It seems to become the hot topic, in the first couple of weeks, and I think it's probably a measure of what's happening with the Delta variant. Right? We had schools open in the spring in many cases. As we're reminded by our members, there were schools who stayed open the whole year, right? With the exception of maybe right at the beginning of the pandemic. But quarantines, the CDC guidance, the CDPH guidance changed on this, depending on vaccination, on masking. But we keep hearing that we have these inordinate numbers of kids being quarantined. Maybe you could talk to us what's happening in LA and how are we being able to take advantage of some of these modified rules from CDC or CDPH as it relates to which kids can stay in school, who has to go home?
So we are following the guidance of the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. We have at some times been more restrictive, but we have never been less restrictive than what Los Angeles County Department of Public Health has advised. And we are in contact with them, for me, almost daily, where we are going through our guidance with them and they are giving us their advice. Currently, our quarantine guidance is that for close contacts, we are only quarantining those individuals who are unvaccinated. So vaccinated students and staff do not have to quarantine. And we will quarantine the unvaccinated students and staff, and they have the option of a shorter quarantine period if they test for COVID-19 after day 5. And so we have been working with our students and staff with that. And I want to emphasize how what a profound difference the district has made. We've created our own community engagement team, which is a team of administrators and nurses. And we did this because we thought we could augment and help our public health department reach our students and staff and communities faster, and also work with our public health department to quickly work through the isolation and quarantine periods. And so we have our own team working on this, as well as working with the public health department.
Dr. If I could ask you a follow-up question on that, just because one of the other sentiments that we're hearing a lot is day by day that these numbers growing, that, kind of the reaction that it's maybe causing in the community and some parents being frustrated about, hey, why does my kid have to stay home? Kind of what's been the early assessment, and maybe because you folks have been dealing with it at a different scale, any advice just on like how to navigate this process, which I know is a challenge for everybody?
Yes, so I understand that this has been a challenge for parents, for our principals, for our staff, for everybody. But I want to keep in mind that our greatest goal is the safety and health of our students and staff. That is what we are leading with. And so if at times we have been more restrictive, it is for the safety and health of our entire community. Keep in mind, again, we're doing 95,000 tests a day almost. At one time, we reached 100,000 tests a day. And so we did expect that there would be positive cases, especially with the Delta variant. But we also had the procedures in place to help mitigate that in-school transmission risk. And so, yes, we have had to have many different students quarantined, but now we are working quickly with the public health department to help release them from quarantine. But we will always follow the guidance of the public health department. And even though it is an inconvenience, keep in mind, safety is our top priority, and that is why we do it.
Want to remind all of you, if you have any questions or comments for our guests, go ahead and drop those into the chat. And before the end of our interview, we will ask about youth sports in LA Unified, because it may give you an idea of how the second largest school district in the nation is doing things and how they may be able to support you. Let me go back to the quarantine issue that Edgar was talking about earlier, because the science has demonstrated that the risk of contracting COVID outdoors is far less than indoors. And yet it appears that the rules don't take into account when dealing with quarantines about potential exposure. I know Edgar just asked you for a little bit of advice, but let me ask you for advice about how you guys deal with outdoor exposure and COVID.
Sure. In the beginning of the summer, everyone was getting a little bit looser with the guidelines because it seemed like cases were decreasing. But then Delta hit, and Delta has been a different beast for everyone. We're still learning about it and how it's transmitted. And so we as a district, again, took the safest approach, and we are requiring masking both indoors and outdoors for students and staff simply because of the Delta variant. We want to create all the ways to mitigate exposure of this virus, right? It's often looked at like a Swiss cheese model, where you have all these layers of mitigation. So the virus has to jump through all these hoops to actually transmit. And so as many layers as we could create, that's what we wanted. And that's why we required that masking both indoors and outdoors, because ultimately, who are we taking care of? We're taking care of children, parents' most precious gifts. And so I would want that for my child, who is an LAUSD student, who is too young to be vaccinated. And I would want that for everybody's child as well.
Dr. Malhotra, we were just getting some questions in here from our viewing audience. So I'll go to Daniel Hernandez's question. And you were just talking about elementary school kids and kind of seeing, he's curious about, have you seen differences in the number of positive cases in younger kids, elementary school students? And are there a large percentage of the LAUSD students choosing virtual academy? I know we're getting into some of the instructional issues there, but just generally speaking, what are you noticing on that end?
So we have not seen large differences in positive cases in elementary schools versus the higher grades, but we are doing everything possible to protect those elementary school students. We mandated vaccines for our staff, and largely to protect those students that cannot be vaccinated as well. We want to create multiple layers. And actually, it's a small percentage of our students have been choosing the virtual academy. It's not a large number, but it's still a small percentage.
We do have two questions that have come in, Doctor, and they kind of talk a little bit about volunteers. Tammy Truax asked the question, are study trips and student internships being permitted? I would assume there is an element to some type of parent volunteer or just volunteers in general as part of that. But then Ellen Wheeler also asked, are you allowing parent volunteers on campus? If so, what requirements are there for those volunteers? We've had guests, other superintendents on the show that have said no volunteers this year on campuses, at least for the time being. What is happening over in LA Unified?
No volunteers at this time. And what was the other question?
The study trips and student internships. What element is there for anybody off campus to be involved in there? If you're saying that no volunteers or anything like that, I would assume that also carries over.
Yeah, and we've also placed a limit on our field trips too. No overnight field trips. So yeah, we are doing everything possible to just make sure we keep our students in-person learning as safely as possible.
Doctor, one of the other pieces of headlines in the news this week was the FDA decision to grant full approval to the Pfizer vaccine. So we're just curious now, mind you, I believe that the full approval only is for 16 and over, right? The individual. But there has been a lot of questions about how may this impact the conversation here in California about vaccine requirements in schools. Obviously, some of your neighbors there in Culver City it took pretty dramatic action. So we get this question quite a bit. Do we believe that the full approval may change some of the conversations that relates to requiring vaccines, or how do you believe it will change the amount of individuals getting the vaccine? So what's your opinion on that?
I am thrilled that the FDA granted full approval. While all of this time, we've been telling our school community that the EUA process is safe because it has proven to be safe. But the full approval still gives those who are vaccine hesitant or have been nervous about getting the vaccine. It will help those people. Actually, there was a study from the Kaiser Family Foundation that showed that that vaccine hesitant people are more likely to get the vaccine once there is full approval. And so I'm thrilled about that, because we'll find more people getting vaccinated. And for school districts, yes, it starts the conversation for mandates. And I'm glad that I applaud Culver City for what they've done.
Dave Garcia from Region 7 asked this question, and it's one that pops up a lot before Governor Newsom put his mandate in about vaccinations and even after. But Dave Garcia asked, what will you do with staff that refuse to vaccinate? Where are we in that space at LA Unified?
Yeah, so our interim superintendent has put out the statement that we will require all staff to get vaccinated by October 15th. There is a process. If staff do not want to get vaccinated, there is a medical and religious exemption process that is carefully looked at. But beyond that, staff will have to get vaccinated or find other employment.
Doctor, well, first I have to give a shout out to my old friend, Megan Riley, since you just talked about the interim superintendent. So I know the district is in very good hands there with Megan on board. I'll ask a question, and I'll give the caveat. This is an instructional question. You're a medical doctor, so I don't expect that you're going to have every the question, but you're on the front lines here in terms of when kids are having to quarantine, helping on the transition. So the one challenge that folks are having around the field right now is, what do we do with the students instructionally when you're going on quarantine? So just from a broad perspective, if you could speak to just, what happens at LA Unified once a kid has been deemed, okay, you've had COVID exposure, we need to put you in quarantine. What's the process looking like that from an academic standpoint?
So from a broad perspective, LA Unified does have a system in place where students will stay with their same teacher and get the same curriculum throughout their quarantine or isolation period. And that's what we've been doing with our isolation and quarantined individuals and families.
Okay, so now we're going to, I'm assuming this question has to do with youth sports from Deanna, but we were going to ask you about youth sports anyway, because we haven't gotten really any guidance up to this point. But Deanna asked the question, as LAUSD implemented the youth guidance recently provided by LA County Health? And if yes, how is that going?
So yes, I was going to say LA County Department of Public Health has actually provided us a lot of guidance along youth sports. They have been in conversations with us through the very beginning. And we have started to implement their recommendations. It's just the second week, but we have actually, as a school district, been very proactive in this area. We have developed a youth task force, a youth sports task force. That's what I meant. Where we will actively work on the guidance that we need to implement for our student athletes. And so we are currently implementing those processes where student athletes need, testing before games. We are prepared to work with our athletes through all of that.
And Doctor, we were talking about this before we came on air, but maybe just because folks are struggling with this, maybe you just walk us through some of the requirements that LA Unified is putting on their youth athletes and kind of what the requirement and how you're making that work, especially when, let's say, one of your teams is going elsewhere or whatnot, and how does that work?
So we want to be, what we want to do first and foremost is be consistent with our rules and our guidelines and our protocols. And so because that's what our community trusts us to do, right? Be consistent. And so with our sports, we do require masking in youth sports as well. Even if they are at another district playing, our teams will be masked. They also go through our very robust testing program where they're getting tested every week. And per LA County guidelines, they will have COVID tests 48 hours before their games too. And so I think we've gone above and beyond to make sure that we are taking care of our student athletes.
I want to ask you about the challenges that you're experiencing with the vaccine mandate for employees. We've heard that there's no testing option at LA Unified. How is that being received?
For the most part, it's being received very well. Again, we are dealing with the Delta variant. And so right now, the testing of all students and staff, regardless of vaccination status, does make sense. But the vaccine mandate has been received well by our communities as well, especially parents of children who are too young to be vaccinated. And ultimately it was the right thing to do. And I think many people understood that. But we do have a process for those employees who need medical exemptions for the vaccine. So we do have accommodations, but for the most part, it's been received in a well way.
Doctor, I know it's always dangerous to ask anybody to make any predictions or whatnot, because we've seen like this pandemic has been very volatile, right? The second we think we're on the tail end, then here we go again. But I know you've been in close contact with your public health officials and obviously LA being at the epicenter of all this. What do you foresee here? Now, school has started. Obviously, we have this robust testing program. I've started to see some headlines here about how the experts think, okay, the surge may starting to subside. Based on everything you've seen on the data that you're receiving and your consultation with their public health officials, what do you foresee here as we go further into the school year on the COVID front?
So, as history has shown, every epidemic has a peak and every epidemic will end. When is the question? I think what I have seen so far with Los Angeles Unified is that we are able to quickly adjust and pivot, and that's what makes us so resilient. And so there will be a point in time where the pandemic peaks and then there's less cases, but it won't happen if we don't get more people vaccinated. And so that is the next push for LAUSD. Our vaccination programs are so extensive. We have done an employee vaccination program where we had a megapod site at SoFi Stadium. We gave more than 37,000 doses to employees. And then we had a student vaccination program. You talked about it, but we also had the same thing in the spring, where we went to all high schools and middle schools, and mobile teams gave vaccinations to those students who were eligible. And we're going to be doing it again this week. And so we are taking all the steps possible to make sure that we as a school district are taking an active role in mitigating this public health crisis. And I think because of that, because of all our combined efforts, eventually we will get to the other side of this pandemic, but we need the partnership of our communities and to work with us as well.
Doctor, I think that Edgar was hoping that you were going to pull out a calendar and actually circle like a specific date on the calendar.
I would be very rich if I could do that.
As a doctor and high-level medical professional, I think he was getting ready to okay, this is the date. We can all get back to normal.
I think we already played this game. I think we all had June 15th circled on our calendar, and we thought the COVID might be over there. I think we've all learned we're going to have to, we're in for the long run here, and we have to just stay at it, right?
Yeah. Dr. Smita Malhotra from LA Unified, the medical director there at Los Angeles Unified School District. It's been an honor to have you here on the show today. Thank you so much, and we look forward to talking with you next time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Edgar, we are just crossing the bottom of the hour. I do want to remind all of you, we teased this a little bit at the top of the show. We do have some resources, some examples that you can use over on the ACSA Resource Hub about ways that districts are communicating with their students, with their parents and guardians about positive cases of COVID in the classroom, in the schools, even possible exposure. I know, Edgar, and I'm a little surprised and then yet not surprised. My daughters are both at the same high school, and they're going to hit 2 weeks of school tomorrow. And we've already had 6 emails about positive cases and exposure in their classes over this 2 weeks. And I would like to say I'm surprised, but I'm not necessarily surprised. So if there are ways that our districts, our administrators can communicate effectively, we certainly have them on the Resource Hub. I do want to ask, because your daughter and son not yet back, correct?
My son is back. He's been back. He's in the neighboring school district. My daughter's Sac Unified, not quite there. So they're all looking, to see kind of what's happening here on just with neighboring districts, right? And Naj, actually, you remind me of one piece that I meant to bring up in our opening, and it's related to what you just said about the early perspectives from the field. We know, we've been reading the chat, we've been hearing from you. Not a day goes by where I don't hear from one superintendent or school leader or site leader about the challenges that they're facing right now, both with the quarantine situation, with independent study. If there was ever a time, and this is where I'm putting on my government relations hat, my advocacy hat, we've said this many times throughout the pandemic, this is another time. If there's a time to we know we're all busy, but those that have those connections with those policymakers, I think this is a good time to pick up the phone, write an email, and do a little bit educating on what it's actually, a lot of these rules and legislation and statute was written with a different frame in mind, right? We were in a better place from the COVID landscape. And I think some of these challenges are coming to a head. So if I could put in a plug to our members to just spend some time educating our policymakers of what the real world looks like right now as you're opening schools, I think it will help the conversations here moving forward if we have to go back and ask for some changes.
I think if we've learned anything, Edgar, over the past year, it's that the lawmakers, the people over at the Capitol across the street, they are listening to ACSA. I mean, their ears are wide open to what our members are saying, to what ACSA is saying. So yes, you are absolutely right. This is the opportunity right now to advocate, to tell those stories, because there's so much. And again, it's changing so often that I think if there's a way, we should definitely be doing it. Edgar, good seeing you, man. 1:34 on a Wednesday. We are halfway through the week, and good show today. We'll see you next week.
Look forward to seeing you again next week.
All right, folks, thank you so much for being with us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We're back next week, live and interactive, Wednesday at 1 p.m. Have a great rest of the day and great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.